college football nerds doing a little something different. 5 reasons why Alabama is going to beat LSU this Saturday. We did our 5 reasons why LSU is going to beat Alabama or could beat Alabama in another video. Make sure you check it out. I'll link it in the description. And also, if y'all are looking for our regular preview format, we did that video last week. It is still up. I will also link that in the description so y'all can check that out as well. We're just trying something a little different for y'all. Had a couple of weeks for this game to marinate, so I wanted to talk about it a little bit more. All right, Josh, you are on the clock. You're going to give us 5 reasons why Alabama is going to win this game. And y'all, we're trying to pick out things that aren't super obvious because it's a little more interesting. If y'all want super obvious, go listen to Paul Feinbaum. All right, I'm going to rebut your 5, so why don't you give me your number 1?
I think my number 1, I'm going to start with the thing that we talk about a lot on the show, and that's advanced stats. So if you look at SP+, if you look at our model, everything has Alabama winning this game, the advanced metrics. And that's not a be-all, end-all, but that does say a lot about where they're at. Alabama is about a 4.5-point favorite in SP+. They're a 6-point favorite over our model. Now, our model... we ran it last week. We're probably not going to do a standalone video because our model is exactly the same score and differential, 6 points different. Even like the Auburn game, it may have been a close game against Ole Miss on the scoreboard. They still dominated statistically, so that wasn't enough to really change our model. But it's still a game that Alabama is better offensively and defensively in SP+. They're better in the scoreboard. And everything in terms of stats, when you adjust for opponent quality, Alabama is the better team.
I feel like you have a history of being married to numbers a little bit, and I have a history of being too much in my gut on things. But if I want to give you a counter on that, I would say that advanced stats are great until they're wrong. What did advanced metrics say about Wisconsin and Ohio State? What did they say about Auburn and Ole Miss? They said it was going to be a little closer, but yes, advanced metrics said Auburn would beat Ole Miss, and yes, that game was closer. But at the end of the day, Ole Miss had the ball with a chance to win the game with a game-winning drive. So right now, I think that what either one of these teams, maybe more so LSU because they're the underdog, what either one of these teams is looking for is a chance to win the game in the fourth quarter. And what do you always say about one-score games as it relates to the numbers and metrics? You say that at that point, randomness comes into play, and at that point, it's really hard to say who breaks that big run at the end of the game and who doesn't.
Yeah, that's true. But at the end of the day, if you got to say one team should win, I'm still going to take the edge because
we are nerds.
Well,
after all.
And you can say that Ole Miss had the ball with a chance to win against Auburn. Did they win? No, they didn't.
They did not because they're Ole Miss.
Because they're Ole Miss. So second stat, my second reason I think Alabama may win the game is that Grant Delpit can't be 3 places at once. When I watch LSU on tape defensively, I think they're suffering a lot from the injury to Todd Harris. I think Stingley's a good player. I think Fulton is maybe a slightly better player today. I think Stingley may be a first-round talent. I don't think he could start on an NFL team today just because he's still learning a little bit how to handle coverage and the speed of the play on the football field. But he and Fulton can pretty well deal with 2 guys on the outside, and then Delpit can handle whatever you throw at him. The problem is Alabama is genuinely, 4 or 5 deep at receiver. And that's kind of a unique problem for a lot of teams, including LSU. I have not felt like Stevens and Vincent have been anywhere near up to par as the 3 other counterparts on that defense in the nickel sets for LSU in terms of their coverage abilities. Stevens is a great player. I know he's been like a defensive player of the week. He's a 230-pound plus player. That's his problem. And when you're playing NFL caliber receivers, which they're going to do in this game, then you have to be nitpicked at an NFL caliber level. Stevens is, I think best case sort of a Mark Barron in the box kind of player. If he's forced into man coverage, he's going to get exposed much the same way that the Pro Bowler Mark Barron was in the NFL. And I think he's going to be forced into coverage along with Vincent. And all Alabama really has to do is put 4 guys out there and throw to the one that is covered by Stevens or Vincent one-on-one. And I think they're going to win that matchup more often than not.
And I think it's a fair point. The issue for me is it's a point that is sort of looked at in a vacuum, in that LSU knows they're going to give up points. LSU knows that these elite wide receivers are going to beat their DBs at some point and they're going to score. But are we saying that Shaheem Carter is going to cover everything that comes out of the LSU backfield or wide receiver unit? Are we going to say that Battle is when he gets put in there, or anybody else for the Alabama secondary that's not Xavier McKinney or their two great starting corners? I don't know that they don't have the same issue on their side of the ball. And I also think that if we're talking about defending these teams holistically, I think that Divinity and Queen are a little better equipped to cover that middle of the field in the RPO game than maybe Alabama's linebackers are.
I think maybe that's a fair point, again, in a vacuum. But I think, and then I wasn't necessarily going to go in this order, but this is going to lead to my fourth point. Alabama also has the best pass rusher in this game. And I think that's the thing that really kind of tips the scales. LSU defensively has 3 first-round defensive backs, and LSU is not as good statistically a defense as Alabama. Why is that? And it's simply because the guys on the rest of the defense haven't been quite up to snuff, in my opinion, with what we've seen from LSU in the past. Terrell Lewis leads the SEC in sacks, and lately Alabama's been rolling out a line that was Barmore, Lewis, and Jennings. And that is actually a very disruptive line. Now, it doesn't have a ton of depth, and as far as we know, they're not going to get LeBron Ray back. There was a time several weeks ago when they said they would. I've heard nothing about that, so I'm assuming that's not going to happen. I still think Alabama has a good pass rush, and it's also true if Divinity is actually out. He is the most productive pass rusher for LSU, and LSU is currently 5th in the conference in sacks, but if you were to take out the production from Divinity, they fall all the way to 10th. LSU was 5th and Alabama was 6th. And I think Alabama has a real edge here, especially if Divinity were not to play. We don't know if he will or won't at this point. But a healthy Alabama has a pass rush that I simply think LSU does not have.
I think you have had some criticisms of him in the past, but I think you kind of glossed over what Chason brings to the game. You and I both have a little bit of a concern that he's not physical enough. And in our, going back to looking at the Florida game, we did notice that he struggled with that. He got put to the ground pretty easily a lot of times, but he does get home as well. And we've got a quarterback in Tua that might not be as mobile with the ankle situation. I will say, if Tua was super healthy, there's some opportunities against LSU defense, the way they play an RPO offense, the way they play basically any offense. There are some opportunities for a running quarterback to make some hay. Although, also, by the way, Joe Burrow will convert at least 3 long third downs with his legs. That's completely unrelated. I think Chason is better than you're giving him credit for in terms of influencing it, though I do agree with you that the big concern that we have about this LSU defense that we think is totally underrated is that they don't get home enough. They don't get home enough in the pass rush.
Yeah, fair enough. So for my fourth point here, I'm going to change it around a little bit and sort of talk about special teams. So this was a counter to a point that you made. Jalen Waddle is the country's leading punt returner and punt return yardage. And if and when Alabama gets punts, they have a significant edge. Stingley is a good returner. I think he's like 20th in the country at 9.7 yards per return. And Waddle more than doubles him at 21.57 yards per return. It's a ridiculous average, and it's a real weapon and asset for Alabama. And I think there's a limitation here with Waddle, and I don't know if you're going to address it, so I'm going to sort of give you a lead. If Alabama gets the punt, I think Alabama can make something of it and make some yards in a game that's really important. The big question probably is if Alabama is being punted to in this game.
So LSU might not kick to Waddle. If they do you know who's tied for first in allowing the fewest long punt returns in the country? It's LSU, who is number 18th overall in punt returns at 3.8 yards per return. It's LSU. Some of it might be coverage. Some of it might be smart that they kick away from people, and some of it might be situational. I think if I have this game figured out in my head the way I think it's going to go, even though we both picked Alabama to win, I don't think there's going to be that much punting. And I do think when there's going to be punting, it's not going to be the result of a 3-and-out. I think a lot of it's going to be punting from midfield, because neither one of these teams is getting off the field with a lot of 3-and-outs in this game, even though I think both these are pretty good defenses. So that neutralizes a lot of the return aspect of this. If I were going to flip this and counter against myself, I would say that I think Alabama has a better opportunity in the kick return game with Henry Ruggs, who's really been coming on lately as a kick returner, because I think there are going to be a lot of scores from LSU and from Alabama, and there's some hidden yardage there that I think that might come into play.
Yeah, and I do agree with you there, and I think at times I've been a little baffled because LSU often has used Edwards-Helaire as a kick returner, and he's not explosive enough, and most running backs aren't. And Henry Ruggs is a top-level first-round draft pick kind of athlete, and that is probably an advantage in the kick return game. And finally, I give my last point, though. So number 5 on why I think Alabama may win this game, it's that Najee Harris averages a 10-plus yard run every 4 plays, once every 4 plays. And now, I haven't been able to rerun the stats this week. This was something I kind of looked at on Twitter last week, but best I can figure, that's the highest route of anybody in the country. It's higher than J.K. Dobbins. It was higher than Travis Etienne. It's higher even guys like Hubbard at Oklahoma State. Najee Harris may not have a ton of long runs, and that affects his average when you look at just his yard per carry average, but his rate at which he gets 10 yards is the highest, 1 and 4. A good deal higher than most everybody else. Even like, Jalen Hurts has great rushing stats, but maybe I think it's only about 50% more likely than Hurts is to get a 10-yard carry. It's the result of the RPO game. It's a result of the fact that teams are so reliant to some degree on dropping guys to defend Tua. I think it caps, we may have a long discussion of this, how much Najee can be explosive because he's constantly running into deep safeties and linebackers. But we saw this last year with LSU. They struggled to stop the run against Alabama. Why did they struggle to stop the run? Because Alabama is an RPO team. And just like LSU lit up Florida with a run game, LSU is going to have a hard time to actually stop the pass game if they're able to do it without leaving themselves extremely vulnerable to the run. And Alabama has been extremely successful at making first downs with the run game using the RPO.
I'm going to counter this on both sides of the ball for LSU. One, I don't think it's fair to use last year's LSU defense as an example of maybe struggles in the run game. They're giving up 2.9 yards per carry on defense rushing, which is better than Alabama. And they've just fattened up that defensive line. I think this is part of why, and we've talked about this before, part of why they struggle in getting home with the quarterback is because they had to shore up that defensive line to be able to do a better job in run defense, and they really get after it. Also, on the flip side, what's hidden in your stat here is that you also said that Alabama, and Najee Harris in particular, is not doing so great in long runs. And what is kind of strange to me is that we've seen these teams who have really focused on the passing game against these RPO teams, and it's been able to stop a lot of the long runs. LSU has managed to, in the last few games against really good defenses, has managed to break off some really huge runs that we haven't seen from Alabama this year. And they're kind of employing the same offensive strategies, and the defenses are defending them the same way. So Alabama's faced lesser competition and is doing worse in the run defensive department. They're facing lesser competition on the other side of the ball and doing worse in the long runs offense department than LSU. So for me, I think if anything, if we're going to talk run game, it's possibly that LSU is going to be the better running team in this game.
Yeah, so it's I mean, it's an interesting stat. I mean, not Alabama is 92nd in the country in 20-plus yard runs, and yet Najee Harris is 12th in the country in 10-plus yard runs. I think that stat may be different than after yesterday, but he was tied with Etienne and Swift going into yesterday. So the drop-off there is pretty dramatic, and it's going to be interesting. And I think a lot of what LSU's success, I will say this, is because LSU is starting to deal with teams, ironically, that are trying to defend the run more than the pass and not trying to get gouged as much with the run. And I say it's ironic because in trying to defend the run, you bring the rush numbers down, but you do
but you
now
give up big runs.
You give up more big runs. And you see this all the time with fourth down defenses. They'll give up touchdowns on a 4th and 1. Why? Because all the second level defenders are closer to the line of scrimmage to prevent the 5-yard carry. And I think that's kind of what's happened a little bit with LSU is teams are not quite as willing to drop back because they saw Florida death by 1,000 cuts in the run game. And the trade-off for that is they've given up more long runs in exchange for not quite giving up 9 yards per carry like Florida did. And it's going to be interesting to see how LSU defends Alabama because they're going to have to choose between that 8 to, consistently giving up maybe 7 yards per carry or playing the run and taking their chances with the Alabama receivers.
All right, so we've got a little bit of time on this. We can squeeze in one more little talking point. If looking at your 5 reasons why Alabama's going to win this game, which one do you think is the strongest in terms of like if Alabama wins this game, which one of these 5 is going to contribute the most to them winning when we give it a retrospective?
I think if I were to look at the 5 points and say which one of them is going to contribute the most to a win in this game, well, I think if I were to say the advance, the fact that Alabama is better, and just point to the model that's cheating, I'm actually going to say it's the point I made where, Delpit can't be everywhere at once. And it's a little bit due to what I was saying where Alabama can spread you wide and they can attack the weakness wherever they see a weakness with LSU's defense. And it's, I think, more with something that we never got to earlier. Because Alabama can be so multiple, it is going to limit what LSU can do defensively. LSU likes to be very aggressive with Delpit. And when they were playing teams, I think it was Florida at one point this year, especially with Auburn. I remember the scene a lot with Auburn, right? We would see Stevens and Delpit both in the box at times. And they would go in a dime set if Florida was 4 or 5 wide. And you'd see Delpit and or Stevens walk up in the box and show, a run defense look because those guys are so versatile. I just don't think they can do that against Alabama. And we saw that a lot in film prep. I don't know how many times the two of us said that to each other. What do you think the odds are that LSU would ever give this look to Alabama? They're going to have to defend it very differently because Alabama is a very different threat. Auburn does not have an RPO game. I think LSU has the manpower to match up one-on-one in a lot of those matchups. I'm not saying they don't, but I'm just saying that they're not going to be able to use the versatility of Stevens and Delpit the way they want because Alabama is going to go 4 or 5 wide. That means you do actually have to walk those guys out, and they have to be in coverage because you just simply can't leave a Judy or a Ruggs or a Devontae Smith or a Waddle uncovered or covered by a linebacker and not give up a touchdown.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I'll see if I can work the image in here. I don't know if I can, if I still have it or not. There was a series against Auburn where they were on their goal line, and it was like 2nd and 9 from the 1, and they walked their safeties up. LSU walked their safeties up, and they were giving like a 9-yard cushion and maybe 7-yard cushion. It was a pretty big one on both wide receivers, and we both said LSU cannot do this against Alabama because you're not going to tackle Judy in space. They're going to check into a 2-yard wide receiver screen, and Judy's going to be gone. With no safety, playing 7-8 yards off of the wide receivers, you'd almost rather them play press man, bump and run coverage with no safety help over the top to at least slow down the timing of the play than to give them space. But you want to give them space because you don't want to put them on an island with no space. But it's a worse thing, and I think they saw that because on the very next play, they had their safeties walked up, but they played bump and run. I'll try to work that picture in. All right, y'all, this was fun. Let us know in the comments what you think about this format. Maybe we can do some of it in the future. I like the debate format, the back and forth where one of us picks a side. But maybe y'all just prefer the regular old previews where we talk for half an hour and we say we're going to do it in 20 minutes. Let us know in the comments. And give us any of your 5 reasons why you think Alabama's going to win this game. Remember to watch the other LSU video and comment there as well. Giving y'all lots of homework this week. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week, and God bless.